Chapter 4. Merchants, Markets, and Mud. Towns in the Middle Ages. The big question: how did the growth of trade during the Middle Ages affect the way people lived? It's raining again. You stand in a puddle on the edge of a narrow street. You have just entered town through one of two gates. The gates are the only ways in and out of this walled town. Inside the walls, tiny townhouses stand side by side. As you move through the crowd, you spot rats scurrying about, feeding on discarded trash. Nearby, you hear the varied cries of people selling fruits, vegetables, eggs, and pies. It is market day, and people have set up their stalls in the town square. As you make your way through the muddy streets, you hear the sound of church bells. They ring out to sound the hour and to call people to church. You have just caught a glimpse of a town in Europe during the late Middle Ages. All right, this caption below this illustration says metalworkers' stall in medieval market. And then this caption below this illustration says streets in medieval towns were often crowded and muddy. In the early part of the Middle Ages, most people lived in the countryside. Between the years 1000 and 1350 CE, fueled by trade, towns began to grow. New jobs emerged, and as a result, more and more people left the countryside to live and work in towns. Here, this illustration is peasants farming in the countryside. With this growth in trade, an increased number of people became involved in commerce or business. As a result, a class of people, called the middle class, grew in importance. Merchants and craftsmen were part of the middle class. Towns grew as the middle class created successful businesses and therefore jobs. Some merchants became rich and influential members of town communities. To protect their businesses, merchants established guilds in towns throughout Europe. Guilds were organizations made up of merchants. Guilds controlled wages as well as the price and quality of the goods the merchants sold. Here, this illustration is merchants and artisans sold goods in town markets. Not only did merchants thrive, so too did skilled craftsmen, such as carpenters, papermakers, glassmakers, and blacksmiths. Skilled craftsmen were also important members of town communities. They made and sold their goods in the towns in which they lived and worked. Just like merchants, skilled craftsmen protected their businesses by forming guilds. Only highly skilled craftsmen were invited to join these guilds. Many years of training went into becoming a skilled craftsman. Here, these are medieval craftsmen: a carpenter, a tailor, an armorer, and a tanner. There was a certain pattern to daily life in towns in the Middle Ages. From Monday to Saturday, towns were busy with the hustle and bustle of street vendors, shopkeepers, craftsmen, and market sellers. Pickpockets and purse snatchers were afoot too. Shops opened as early as 6 o'clock a.m. Most towns held markets 2 or 3 times a week. Local farmers sold produce and animals. Towns seen in medieval manuscript. Towns were not outside the control of the local lord. Merchants and craftsmen usually paid lords in the form of money or goods. However, in exchange for money or goods, many lords granted towns special charters. The charters allowed wealthy and influential townspeople the right to make their own laws. Over time, this new decision-making process changed the feudal system. Charters such as this one from Bedford, England, outlined certain rights. With a growing economy, a banking system began to develop. The increasingly wealthy churches in towns created schools called universities. Places such as Oxford and Cambridge in England and Paris in France became important centers of learning. Construction on the chapel at Oxford University's Merton College began in the 1200s. Wow. It was not long before many European towns and cities became terribly overcrowded. People lived in small houses crowded together. The towns and cities were also disease-ridden. Rats scurrying about helped spread disease. Unless you lived in a castle, you did not have a toilet inside your home. Instead, people used chamber pots and threw the contents into the streets. Ooh. Caption below this photograph says, "Rats spread disease in towns." Local water supplies, polluted with the waste that was discarded daily, carried disease. Sickness and disease were common. The Black Death spread easily in such conditions. As they did in the countryside, people in towns cooked on small fires inside their homes. Fires frequently broke out and were difficult to control. Townspeople were required to keep buckets of water outside their homes, just in case. Many middle-aged towns were walled. People entering or leaving did so through gates. Often a toll or fee was charged to enter a town. A toll collector stood at the gate to collect the fee. The tolls were either paid in money or in goods. Gates were designed to keep criminals out, or, if necessary, to lock criminals in so that they could be caught. There was no organized police force, but instead there were watchmen. Any member of the public could be asked to help catch an escaping criminal. The town gates were locked at night when the curfew bell sounded. This gate leads into the town of Besalú, Spain, built in the 1100s. Originally, curfew bells rang to inform those in the taverns that it was time to leave. However, they soon became a signal to everyone that it was time to go home. If you were an apprentice craftsman, just like the boys who go off to train to be knights, you too are sent away at an early age. Your family arranges your training. You must live in the home of a master or highly skilled craftsman. It is unlikely that you will return home again during your apprenticeship years. Apprentice blacksmith assisting his master. Your training will take many years to complete. You will not receive payment for any of the work you do. During this time, you are part of your master's household. You live in his home or shop. You usually eat with his family. Your new family provides the clothes you wear. Even if you are homesick or sad, you have to obey your master. A journeyman blacksmith continued to work for his master. After a specified period of time, you advance from being an apprentice to becoming a journeyman. As a journeyman, you are paid by your master each day for your work. Usually you continue to work for your master as an employee. After several years as an employee, you might take the next step in your career. You might be ready to submit a piece of your best work, called your masterpiece, to the guild for approval. If the guild accepts your work, you finally become a master craftsman. You might even be able to open your own shop with your name above the door. A master blacksmith might open his own shop. Women in the Middle Ages. Women in the Middle Ages had few legal rights. However, a small number of women in positions of power had significant influence. For example, women who became queens were often in a position to advise their husbands and sons, the kings and princes. A lord's widow who did not have sons could manage her deceased husband's land and make important decisions. Women could become skilled in a particular craft, and some trained to be merchants. Other women joined the church and became nuns. Many women worked alongside their husbands in the fields. Regardless of whether they were part of the privileged class or were serfs, as important members of their households, women managed their families' daily needs. Two interesting women from this time period were Empress Matilda and Abbess Hildegard of Bingen. Empress Matilda lived during the 1100s and was the daughter of King Henry I of England. She was involved in leading an army against an English king. She escaped capture and went to France. She was also the mother of King Henry II of England. Here she is, Empress Matilda, daughter of Henry I of England. Abbess Hildegard was a writer and composer who lived during the 1100s. She wrote about many different subjects, including philosophy, science, and medicine. She also developed an alternative English alphabet. Here is Abbess Hildegard of Bingen. Medieval musings. In the Middle Ages, townspeople tried to avoid drinking water because it was so polluted. What did they drink instead? Clue, it's a drink made from grain. 2. In the Middle Ages, people created last names to describe the job they did. What did men with the last name Shoemaker or Cooper do? And then here's your letter quest. Find the letter in the stained glass window and record it on activity page 2.3.